Welcome back to another episode of Change Talk. Please note that in this video we will be talking about suicide and thoughts of death. If you start feeling as though this video is hitting too close to home, please talk to a mental health professional or get immediate medical help. Depression and anxiety are often viewed as two separate diagnoses, and they sometimes are. However, these two ailments can be more closely related than you think. Perhaps sometimes the most difficult populations to deal with, a person with depression may argue that they have given up and have no motivation for change. And the other, suffering from anxiety, will give you a list of 1,001 reasons why something bad might happen if they take any sort of risk. This negative spiral self-talk is often immobilizing for the two types of clients. As a therapist, you try to challenge these negative cognitions. However, these clients can sometimes be so far down that rabbit hole that they honestly feel as though they are controlled or victims of external events or circumstance. I get depressed just thinking about it. Even worse, chronic anxiety, stress, and even depression has been proven to slow down or even sometimes halt neurogenesis and new learning. So here you get the client unmotivated towards change that is unlikely going to remember anything that you just said. Couple these factors with the natural consequences that ensue due to these behaviors of losing employment, not leaving the home, and various other external influences, and the prognosis for some of these cases appears initially bleak for some clients. Typically, both clients acknowledge that there is a problem, but are still visitors to treatment. How does this work, you ask? Well, if someone acknowledges that a problem exists and feels as though it will be permanent and unchanging, then they generally do not believe in the effectiveness of therapy or their own ability to overcome their enabling thinking. These populations are likely to agree with most of what the therapist has to say, however, will then later negate most of what has been said by excuses and the word but. An example would be, yeah, I agree with what you're saying that I need to leave the house, but each time I try, I end up going to my room and I start crying. Sort of like a paradox people get stuck in. Most people agree that exercise and activity are some of the best initial interventions for depression. However, most people that have depression especially remain depressed because they are still inactive. What a conundrum. Depression takes so many forms in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. However, even these unique diagnoses have variations only a trained mental health professional is able to spot. Symptoms of depression may include persistent sad, anxious, or empty mood, feelings of hopelessness, pessimism, or sometimes cynicism, irritability, sometimes look like other diagnoses such as oppositional defiant disorder in children or bipolar due to the appearance of a manic episode. In addition, you might experience feelings of guilt, worthlessness, or helplessness. A person with depression frequently experiences a loss of interest or pleasure in hobbies and activities, has decreased energy or fatigue, and a reduced motor functioning, which also may result in talking more slowly. A lot of the previous symptoms are a good indication of what's called lethargic or loss of energy depression. An example would be a widow eating nightly quarts of ice cream, not getting out of bed, and feeling sad all the time. Anxious depression, on the other hand, could look like the individual is feeling restless or having trouble sitting still, difficulty concentrating or remembering or making decisions, difficulty sleeping, early morning awakening or oversleeping, appetite and or weight changes. So while the widow, for instance, is gaining weight from stress hormones and hopefully a really good ice cream manufacturer, Stephen looks like that battery bunny, losing 30 pounds in the past 2 months and is space cadeting like crazy. Oh yeah, Steve also is highly confrontational and appears agitated all the time. Remember that cultural differences, such as gender, can make depression look very different than what is typically expected. This is especially important since when I meet men that are depressed initially, they are on the verge of having their wife or girlfriend leave them due to their anger as being perceived as a choice and not a symptom. Clients having thoughts of death or suicide attempts can vary depending on severity. If you ever go see a more traditional psychologist and have a motorcycle, the therapist might tell you that you have a secret unconscious wish to die. Although in my opinion this is not typically the case, this style of thinking and analyzing clients does have some merit. I find persons that have experienced severe trauma often place themselves in very dangerous professions or hobbies. If you have had that feeling that I have nothing to lose anyways, this might be the very same mindset to keep an eye out for. Generally speaking, especially when we get older, thoughts of death are commonplace for most people. Why? We're getting older and know that we have only so many years left. Our parts start failing on our own bodies, and our significance in this world has changed forms. However, frequent and recurring thoughts of death could be considered suicidal ideation and is something to definitely keep an eye out for. Now, a typical clinician response would be, if you ever suspect that someone is having these recurring thoughts, to get medical help immediately. However, once this person is in front of a clinician, we typically perform an assessment measuring 3 typical things. Suicidal ideation is just what we were talking about before, thoughts of our own death. However, dependent on frequency, severity, and context, the clinician will attempt to discover if this person is a threat to themselves or anyone else. Part of this analysis requires considering a client's culture, age, and gender. Typically, cultural components that raise the chances that these thoughts are a heightened threat. Statistically, men are more likely to do what we call complete suicide, and women more frequently are more vocal about these same thoughts, and thankfully raise someone's awareness before it gets too late. In addition, it's also a ballpark assumption that despite depression typically getting worse around the holidays, the risk for a person hurting themselves goes up during especially the following 2 weeks after each and every holiday. Why do you ask? The reason why this occurs after the holidays is that persons seeking to end their own lives do not wish to inconvenience others and wait until after the holidays for that same reason. The next 2 things that are assessed are plan and means. Sometimes the 2 go together, since oftentimes you need to access certain things in your life to develop a plan, such as obtaining access to a firearm. Sometimes these categories can be separate, like a child feeling down due to not seeing their parents. Thinks about death, develops a plan or map towards executing what he would do if the school is set on fire, but has no access to things that would create one easily. Is this fire setting an attempt to hurt himself, someone else, or is just a manifestation of anxiety that this child has surrounding his own safety? Again, I can't stress this enough. This is the decision of a trained professional and should not be kept a secret. Trust me when I say, keeping a secret such as this one could be fatal. Means also commonly take the most frequent form of pills or illicit, prescribed, and recreational drugs. With this in mind, make sure as you're calling for help that this person does not have access to any of these items during this emotional crisis. Many families, when they are told this caution over the phone, do not consider alcohol as being a threat. Keep in mind how medications react with alcohol, and that alcohol in large quantities are mixed with other depressants, and more specifically benzodiazepines, can definitely shut down your life-giving brainstem at the bottom of your skull. Chances are as well, if you're a witness to an attempt or plans of someone hurting themselves or someone else, this is not the first time they have had these thoughts, and you should again take them very seriously. In addition, it's important to identify the various other ways someone could get depressed. Alcohol, unhealthy diets, lack of sunlight, lack of identity and purpose, lack of exercise, poor peer support, medication side effects, and so on can definitely cause or exacerbate depressed symptoms. Sometimes depression can be externally triggered, such as a death in the family or significant loss, such as a disabling condition or loss of employment. These are typical responses to real triggers, and most people feel this way for a limited amount of time due to their depression being triggered externally. However, again, The only way of getting a good assessment of these symptoms is by seeing a mental health professional. Anxiety, on the other hand, can be caused by a great deal of things, and again, has many different names in our diagnostic lingo and takes many forms. Anxiety generally comes from fear of the unknown and has very strong and debilitating side effects. Chronic anxiety often results in unwanted additional physical health diagnoses, such as high blood pressure or a medical diagnosis related to chronic stress. People typically try to avoid things that make them anxious. However, it's first important to realize why we need anxiety. That's right, anxiety is by design a good thing. Anxiety tells us that something is important, not to forget about things, or to make it on time to places. Anxiety gives us a warning that something is up or something needs to change. Anxiety also becomes a great motivator to wake up in the morning and towards achievement of some kind. Having no anxiety leads to not getting out of bed in the morning or missing important appointments. Having too much anxiety leads to not leaving your home or having all sorts of fears that prevent your life towards going into a positive direction. Typically, the first intervention I conduct, besides telling my clients the importance of anxiety, is to illuminate those dark corners or the unknowns that are causing many of their anxious feelings. Easier said than done, I know. But most forms of anxiety exist for a reason. And the best intervention is also the most obvious, and that's to simply take care of business. Find out more about the situation that you're in, and take steps towards correcting what's wrong in your life. If you don't go down to the Department of Social Services, get your food stamps, find a place to live, and keep yourself busy throughout the day, my interventions will be nominally effective. Hence, the reason why a good psychotherapist will at least have some knowledge of case management or the capacity towards tackling the elephant in the room. A little known fact is that such an important task is generally not reimbursed by insurance companies. And doing the right thing versus getting paid sometimes comes into conflict with some therapists. For adults generally, insurance companies generally do not reimburse for case management. Hopefully one day this will change, since mental health will always require a multi-pronged approach. Always utilize therapists that want you to succeed as much as you do, but at the same time, understand that most therapists see around 7 to 8 clients a day, and all of this takes time and resources that they don't have in abundance. This means that if you're going to ask for your therapist's help or assistance, make sure you do most of the heavy lifting. This is your life after all. What's the expression? You can lead a horse, ... Not to mention, this courtesy of finding resources for clients can also become a dependency on part of the client. There are a variety of ways to reduce the anxiety in your life. Perhaps the easiest being becoming more organized. Get a whiteboard, agenda, that phone app with reminders, and so on. The more you have backups and share the load, the less your mind is going to have to work on overtime. Also, understand the importance of novelty. With both depressed and anxious clients, it's easy to get stuck in old repetitious behaviors that are boring, destructive, and often fuel our symptoms. Your brain is designed to take shortcuts in order to be efficient and become stuck easily in taking these shortcuts. What do you think are the drawbacks of this propensity, however? Let's see. Ruminations, recursive or recurrent behaviors, black and white thinking, and so on. If you see a clinician for anxiety or depression, chances are they might even ask you to eventually expose yourself to the very trigger that you're trying to avoid in order to help break the cycle and develop a more appropriate behavior. Afraid of flying, for instance. A therapist might first have you imagine that you're buying your first ticket to the Caribbean. Then, the next session, imagine actually making it to the boarding line and eventually actually being up in the air on the plane. Eventually, these imagined responses will turn to actual actions, slowly but surely exposing the client to the negative stimuli. In addition, there are a laundry list of behavioral interventions that are extremely effective in treating both depression and anxiety that go beyond the scope of this video. Cognitive behavioral therapy also focuses on the many myths or maladaptive thoughts that lead us towards staying in our funk. This can include many irrational beliefs, such as I must be accepted by everyone, people are either good or bad, bad emotions and experiences are things I must stay away from, also known as the I must be happy all the time, I must keep up with the Joneses, I must amplify any situation which I perceive to be a threat so I won't get hurt. If I avoid negative feelings, then they won't bother me. My past defines who I am right now, and happiness is something I should plan for. One of the pitfalls I often hear from most people suffering from addiction, all the way down to your typical anxiety disorder, is that when I finally get X, Y, Z, then I'll finally achieve my goals and I can plan for change. That XYZ may never come. Or like most people, something might get in the way to prevent that from happening. Most likely, due to life getting in the way, you will probably forget and bury deep down the memories of making these goals for yourself. Your choice towards being happy, building up a strong support network, and being grateful for the very things you do have will always be in the here and now. You simply cannot plan to be happy. What makes you happy at this very moment? That you can secretly watch this video without being judged? The weather outside today, perhaps? Or maybe there is a way that today could have gotten worse for you. How did you prevent that from happening? Alright, well there you have it. The similarities and differences between anxiety and depression. Even if either one of these symptoms are temporary or mild, a clinician will assist you towards growing from that experience. When it comes to treatment of these common symptoms, sometimes treatment is as simple as getting a little bit more organized or simply being able to identify how you're feeling when you're exposed to these triggers. Therapists can definitely assist you with a lot more severe versions of these conditions. But that again goes beyond what this introductory discussion is capable of conveying, due to Change Talk LLC's desire to keep these videos short and simple to understand. Have any questions or have feedback about today's video? Email us at changetalkllc@gmail.com to receive a response within usually 48 hours. Next time, we will be discussing another common and sometimes misunderstood diagnosis, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or also known as ADHD. See you next time, and thanks for your support.